I'll go first and then kind of slide over for you. Welcome to the Harvard Art Museums and this evening's opening celebration for Animal-Shaped Vessels from the Ancient World, Feasting with Gods, Heroes, and Kings. My name is Mitchell Johns, and I'm a senior living in Dunster House, and I concentrate in English.
And my name is Eleanor Lieberman, and I am a senior in Adams House and concentrate in psychology. Mitch and I are members of the Harvard Art Museum Student Board, and we are delighted to welcome you to the museum on behalf of our student community. Please now be sure to turn off your cell phones and help us to warmly welcome Martha Tedeschi, Elizabeth and John Moores Cabot, Director of the Harvard Art Museums, who will introduce tonight's program.
Thank you, Eleanor and Mitchell. Welcome back to campus. It's so wonderful to have the energy and enthusiasm of our students back on campus and in our museum. Classes started this week, for those of you who weren't aware, and the excitement is really palpable. So thank you very much for being with us and for being part of our student board. So good evening, everyone, and a warm welcome to the Harvard Art Museums. We're delighted that you've joined us tonight for the opening celebration of animal-shaped vessels from the ancient world, feasting with gods, heroes, and kings. This is an exhibition that has been many years in the making, and as you will see for yourselves, or maybe you already have, it was well worth the wait. Tonight, we will hear first from the exhibition's curator, Susanna Ebbinghaus. Then we will welcome our guest speaker, Michael Dietler, who will present his lecture, Liquid Material Culture, Anthropological Explorations of Alcohol and Drinking Vessels. What could be more intriguing than that? Michael is a professor of anthropology, associated faculty in classics and social sciences, and affiliate of the program on the ancient Mediterranean world at the University of Chicago. And I'm so pleased to welcome a fellow Chicagoan to the podium on this special occasion. Animal-Shaped Vessels from the Ancient World is a project that originated in Susanna Ebbinghaus's dissertation, and which I'm also told was her job talk when she was hired by Harvard. So it has a history here from the beginning. And it has been nurtured over the years that this museum was closed for renovation. It's a perfect project for the Harvard Art Museums, as it epitomizes our commitment to publishing original research and scholarship, supporting the intimate consideration of the object, and representing the great breadth of human creativity across temporal and geographic boundaries. I want to take this opportunity to congratulate Susanna and her large and excellent exhibition team, many of whom I hope are watching tonight. We have off-site viewing elsewhere in the museum, and to thank them for giving us truly a once-in-a-lifetime experience with this exhibition. Of course, such a project could not happen without our generous supporters and lenders, and we're so happy that some of them are with us tonight. We're especially grateful to the National Endowment for the Humanities, who supported this exhibition with a major grant, and we're honored that two representatives from the NEH could join us this evening. They are the Honorable Carlos Diaz-Rocio, Deputy Chairman of the NEH, and the Honorable Anne Imelda Rudice, Advisor to the Chairman and Director of the Division of Public Programs at the NEH. So welcome to both of you. In addition, we're deeply grateful to a number of other supporters, including the anonymous donor of a gift in memory of Melvin Seaton, and to Malcolm Weiner and Michael and Helen Lehman for enabling us to mount this exhibition and to pursue the related research over many years. This work was also made possible by the David M. Robinson Fund and the Andrew W. Mellon Publication Funds, including the Henry McElhaney Fund. Finally, I want to acknowledge, as we often do in this auditorium, the M. Victor Leventritt Fund, which brings outstanding scholars of the history and theory of art to Harvard and to the greater Boston communities through the generosity of his wife, children, and friends, of the late M. Victor Leventritt, who was Harvard class of 1935. And now I'm pleased to introduce Susanna Ebbinghaus, who is head of the Division of Asian and Mediterranean Art and is also the George M.A. Hanfman Curator of Ancient Art and curator of this extraordinary exhibition. Susanna is responsible for the collection of ancient and Mediterranean and Near Eastern art, and is also oversees general curatorial matters concerning the division of Asian and Mediterranean art. She's especially interested in the material culture of feasting. Good job, Susanna. Can't think of a better topic. And in cross-cultural exchanges between Greece and the Near East. In 2007, she organized the exhibition Gods in Color, Painted Sculpture of Classical Antiquity. And tonight, she's going to tell us about her party animals, which is how we have fondly nicknamed the charming creatures featured in her exhibition. But first, I am honored to welcome to the podium the Honorable Carlos Diaz-Rocio, Deputy Chairman of the National Endowment for the Arts. Dr. Diaz-Rocio was appointed to this esteemed position in June 2018, and he serves as the COO of the NEH, where he is directly responsible to the chairman for oversight of program development, policy formulation and implementation, and resource management, planning, and budget processes, and effective internal controls. So we could not be more grateful for the work that you all do at the NEH. We really couldn't. And so we look forward to welcome you in just a moment. The other reason we're so pleased to welcome you, of course, is that you came from here. Dr. Diaz-Rocio was Assistant Dean of Harvard College and a member of the faculty in the Department of Government before he left for the NEH. So welcome home, and now we welcome you to the podium. Thank you.
Thank you, Martha, for that kind introduction. Yes, it's great to be home. I was a member of the Faculty of Government, as Martha said, for 9 years before joining the administration, first in the White House and now at the NEH. As you might know, the NEH was founded in 1965 to serve and strengthen our republic by promoting excellence in the humanities and conveying the lessons of history to all Americans. Because democracy demands wisdom, the NEH is a critical piece of our democratic tradition. So despite what you might hear out there, despite what the news might say, despite the noise, we're open for business. We care deeply about the value of studying and understanding the human condition in all its complexities and wonderful forms, and we're committed to advancing the mission and the interdisciplinary work of the endowment. And I mentioned interdisciplinary because I really feel that we need to look at the humanities and the contribution of the humanities from the most interdisciplinary perspective possible. Myself, as somebody who has training in both the STEM field, in the social sciences, and in the humanities, I know firsthand the value of bringing that multidisciplinary perspective to all intellectual pursuits. So to the extent possible at the agency, we want to make sure that we bring that interdisciplinary perspective to the work that we sponsor. And speaking of the work that we sponsor, I could not be more thrilled to be here with you at the opening of this exhibit. Not only because of its tremendous historic, cultural, and aesthetic value, but of course because it's at Harvard. And the NEH has a long history and long relationship with Harvard. The first grant, you might want to know, was in 1970. The first grant to Harvard was in 1967, just 2 years after the agency was founded. And it was for a $35,000 research project. And since that time, about 50 years ago, the NEH has awarded Harvard and its museums and its affiliates 653 grants for over $53 million and counting. 43 of them were from the Division of Public Programs, which supported the exhibition that we're celebrating tonight. And that's the division that Anne Radice directs. Everybody knows Anne, and I'm so pleased to be with her and to be working with her. It's just a tremendous treat. Thank you for being here with me. Her division gave the first grant to Harvard in 1973 and has given over $5 million to Harvard so far and counting. Animal-shaped vessels from the ancient world is a truly unique exhibition. I guess all exhibitions are unique, but this one is truly magnificent. Has over 60 amazing pieces of various animal shapes. And it's about ideas, and the NEH celebrates ideas. And so these vessels conveyed ideas at the feast at which they were used, and they showed visual communications of the spoken words and songs of those feasts. They celebrate with this exhibition, we celebrate 3,000 years of history, and we're transported along the Silk Road, travel to Africa, and visit Europe and the New World through the tangible. We move beyond the beautiful objects of the people who own and use these artifacts, and we learn about feasts and their place in ancient society through the archaeological approach of this exhibition. I should note that the world-class ceramic collection of the Harvard Art Museums also added another dimension to the scholarship and teaching opportunities for all ages to enjoy. I know I'm not the entree here. We want to hear about drinking and alcohol in the main part of the lecture, so I'll shut up in just 30 seconds. But to conclude, I just want to highlight how uniquely qualified the Harvard Art Museums is to bring this historic exhibition, one that will provide depth of scholarship, learning, aesthetics, and beauty, which will live far beyond the 4 months that it will be here at Harvard and in its future venues. So thank you again for being here, and it's a pleasure to be with all of you. Thanks.
Good evening. I'm Susanne Ebbinghaus, Curator of Ancient Art and Head of the Division of Asian and Mediterranean Art. Thank you for coming to celebrate with us on this hot and stormy evening. And thank you for your kind remarks, Dr. Diaz-Rocio. We are indeed immensely grateful to the National Endowment for the Humanities and to the other supporters of the exhibition for allowing us to realize this ambitious project. The exhibition relies almost entirely on loans from over 20 institutions in the United States and in Europe. We know all too well how much work it is to send objects on the road and would like to express our warmest gratitude to the museums that have generously lent to this show. At larger institutions, such as the Museum of Fine Arts here in Boston, the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the British Museum and the Louvre, multiple departments have contributed objects. And I'm very glad that some of the curators could join us for the celebration tonight. Smaller museums have taken some of their star objects off display for us. The National Archaeological Institute with Museum in Sofia, for example, lent an ancient silver vessel excavated as recently as 2005. The exhibition catalog, too, has been enormously enriched by the contributions of many colleagues, and it is great to see several of you here tonight. The first copies of the catalog have just arrived today, and more will soon be available in our shop. I would like to thank Martha Tedeschi and former director Tom Lenz for their strong support of this project. And I'm deeply indebted to the many staff members here at the Harvard Art Museums who have worked tirelessly to bring about the exhibition, the catalog, and tonight's event, and whose professionalism, ability to problem solve, and sense of humor have been key ingredients for the project's success. A stellar team of postdoctoral fellows and graduate student interns has contributed in manifold ways, writing catalog as well as gallery label text and creating the digital tool that accompanies the exhibition. So a very warm thank you to you all. Before we hear about feasting and its ingredients from Michael Dietler, I would like to introduce you to some of the animals starring in the exhibition. The ancient vessels assembled in the galleries upstairs span 3 continents, Asia, Africa, and Europe, and 3 millennia from the early 2nd millennium BCE to the 7th century CE. Each vessel once featured at a feast of sorts, be it a solemn banquet, a raucous party, a libation poured for a deity, or a funeral ritual. The vessels also attest to the lively exchange of objects and ideas that connected different parts of the ancient world, from the Mediterranean across the Near East and Central Asia, all the way to China and Korea. The earliest known animal-shaped vessels come from Syria, Mesopotamia, that is modern-day Iraq, and Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, and are some 8,000 years old. The archaeological evidence is particularly rich for the second millennium BCE, the Middle and Late Bronze Age, when vessels in the shape of animals, or just their heads, flourished in Anatolia and the Aegean, that is modern-day Turkey and Greece. The vessel in the form of a standing, roaring lion is typical of the examples found at Kanesh, an important Anatolian trading center. The cylindrical spout on the lion's back is the only feature indicating that it is a vessel rather than a statuette. It has been argued that such vessels were emptied with the help of drinking tubes or straws, and as you can see, they're actually attested for the ancient Near East, for instance, on the cylinder seal. Texts from the mid-2nd millennium BCE, when Anatolia was ruled by the Hittites, mention animal-shaped vessels, called bibru, in the context of religious rituals. The Hittite texts describe the king and the queen drinking from vessels in the shapes of animals associated with particular deities. Literally, the texts state that the deity is imbibed. For example, and I quote, "The king and the queen drink the storm god from a bull vessel." Did the royal couple indeed take in the spirit of the divinity, or are we dealing with a grammatical peculiarity and a more straightforward toast to the gods? Bull-shaped and bull-head vessels occurred also in the Eastern Mediterranean, in Minoan Crete, Mycenaean Greece, and on the island of Cyprus. The muzzles of these vessels are pierced. They are not cups, but flowing vessels, or reiter, to use the Greek term. The provision of a hole made these vessels suitable for filtering liquids and pouring libations or liquid offerings. Their fine context, too, suggests ritual use, including at funerals. The two vessels shown here, and many others like them, were placed in tombs. Bulls were prominent in the religion of the Bronze Age and served as sacrificial animals. It is not unlikely that the liquid poured from such vessels was a substitute for the animal's blood. The vessels of the Late Bronze Age circulated widely across the Eastern Mediterranean and Near East. This ram-head cup of faience, a quartz-based material, comes from a tomb in Cyprus but was probably made in Syria. Similar vessels were found on the Uluburun shipwreck, the remains of a trading vessel that sank off the coast of Turkey in the late 14th century BCE. A clay tablet, written in cuneiform, preserves a letter of around the same time sent by the Hittite king to the Egyptian pharaoh, which mentions silver vessels in the shape of a stag and a young ram. Clearly then, animal-shaped vessels of precious materials served as diplomatic gifts at the highest levels. Which brings us from feasting with gods to feasting with heroes and kings. The Achaemenid Persian Empire provides a rich case study. Centered on Iran, the Achaemenid Empire was heir to the great Mesopotamian empires of earlier times. Around 500 BCE, it stretched from Egypt in the west to the Indus Valley in the east. Achaemenid animal-shaped vessels combined the forepart, that is the head, chest, and forelegs, of a mythical creature with a roughly horn-shaped beaker, and these vessels were also equipped with a second opening in the creature's chests. In contrast to Bronze Age reiter, the curved shape of the Achaemenid reiter meant that the jet of liquid that gushed from their lower end could be directed, for example, in a more conventional cup, as is illustrated in this representation of a Greek vessel. The cup would then be drunk from the rim. Alternatively, one could also pour directly into one's mouth. In either event, drinking from a rhyton was quite a spectacle and would have required a significant capacity for alcohol, since the stream of liquid could not easily be stopped once it was released. The beasts that form the foreparts of surviving Achaemenid reiter of precious metal, such as this griffin, which combines the features of a lion and an eagle with sweeping horns, These beasts recur in the sculptural decoration of the royal palaces at the Achaemenid capital city Persepolis in southwestern Iran. There, they express royal power in a metaphorical manner. We see the so-called royal hero grappling with a variety of mythical creatures. Once subdued, the ferocious griffins, lion monsters, and curly-furred bulls are put into service, supporting the palace roofs in the form of back-to-back column capitals. Reliefs from the facade of the main audience hall at Persepolis show delegations from across the empire demonstrating their allegiance by bringing gifts to the king, including precious metal vessels. The Rhyton is not among them, but another shape with animal features is included, the amphora with handles in the form of mythical beings. Gold and silver vessels were also handed out by the king and officials. Making the recipient a quasi-drinking companion of the king, they served as status symbols and created obligation. The splendid silver amphora with handles in the form of horned and winged lion monsters, probably made in the western part of the empire around 480 BCE, ended up in a woman's tomb in Thrace, that is modern-day Bulgaria, reminding us that women from prominent families could own such prestige vessels too. The lion's association with kingship made it attractive to provincial elites. This striking Rhyton forepart of a roaring lion clutching a now headless beast of a prey animal, perhaps a gazelle, consists of blue faience and was probably made in Egypt. And it shows the impact of Achaemenid artistic conventions. Earlier Egyptian lion images tend to be peaceful, with closed mouth and crossed over paws. The Greeks appear to have been reluctant to adopt Achaemenid writer. Maybe they felt Rhyton drinking was too messy, or they were put off by the vessel's close association with their arch-enemy, or perhaps they deemed the Rhyton undemocratic. Instead, potters from Athens created a menagerie of animal head mugs, all equipped with a handle, and some also with a foot, so they could be put down before they were empty. This large example combines a ram head with a depiction of the ancestral kings of Athens, including the hero Theseus, at a drinking party or symposium. The ram symbolized leadership and was the preferred animal sacrificed to heroes. As part of a cup, it would also have brought to mind the Achaemenid and earlier Near Eastern animal vessels. Since the Athenian mug was made around the time that the Greeks rebuffed the Persian invasion of Greece, one wonders whether it was a victory monument of sorts. Besides the ram, Athenian potters championed an animal held to be distinctly less noble, the donkey. In the Greek mind, the beast of burden was closely associated with wine god Dionysus and considered rough, recalcitrant, literally asinine, and prone to uncontrolled sexual aggression. It seems that drinking parties in 5th century BCE Athens focused less on power play than on behavioral norms. The relationship of drinker to cup was different too. Rather than confront a lion or other ferocious beast, the drinker was transformed into a donkey by raising the mask-like mug to his lips and draining it, with the creature braying when the vessel was empty and the transformation complete. In the 4th century BCE and in the aftermath of Alexander's conquest of the Achaemenid Empire, animal-shaped vessels combined both Greek and Persian traits. The deer-head vessel from a Thracian tomb looks like a Greek mug, but is in fact a Rhyton, its rim depicting griffins attacking a bull. The Hellenistic Rhyton forepart in the center represents a mythical creature, but the man-horse or centaur is a Greek, not a Persian invention. The sweeping Rhyton at right terminates in the forepart of a feline, but wears a Dionysian grape and ivy wreath draped around its shoulders. It is one of a number of elaborate silver Rhyta made in the Parthian Empire, the Near Eastern counterpart to the Roman Empire. Writer continued in use in the Sasanian Empire, which was the last pre-Islamic empire in the Near East, and it extended into Central Asia. It was at that time, in the 6th and 7th centuries CE, that the Sogdians, Iranian merchants from Central Asia, brought writer to China, perhaps together with grape wine. On this panel of a Sogdian funerary couch from China, we see a man, likely the deceased, seated under a grape arbor, pouring from a bullhead rhiton directly into his mouth. Chinese interest in writer was limited, however, and the millennia-long history of animal-shaped vessels would soon come to an end. As you will see when you go into the exhibition, it includes some later objects from other cultures, underlining the near-universal appeal of animal-shaped vessels. I don't want to spoil the surprise for you, so I will highlight just one kind of vessel here, the drinking horn. There can be little doubt that people of the past used animal horns as drinking vessels, but keratin, the horn substance, does not survive well in the archaeological record. Horns were vessels of prestige for much of their history, for example among the early Celts and the ancient inhabitants of the Black Sea area, in early Korea, medieval and early modern Europe, and early 20th century West Africa. The finely carved buffalo horn with elaborate beaded decoration that you see on the left comes from the Bamum kingdom in the Cameroon grass fields, where drinking horns were ceremonial and ritual items closely connected with the king. The horn on the right, too, once belonged to leaders. Made in the Caucasus, where drinking horns have never gone out of fashion, it was sent together with a sampling of local wines by Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev to President Kennedy in September 1962. While secretly shipping missiles to Cuba, Khrushchev was essentially inviting the US president to share a drink. I don't want to claim that this gesture saved the world from a nuclear war, but I would like to invite you to keep this story in mind as you look at the ancient vessels in the exhibition, and to think of them as witnesses of many a feast where social relationships were forged and reinforced, and reputations gained and lost with the help of potent animal symbolism and the help of a drink. And this brings me to our main lecture this evening. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Michael Dietler, Professor of Anthropology, Associated Faculty in Classics, of Social Sciences in the College, and affiliate of the program on the Ancient Mediterranean World at the University of Chicago. To those of us exploring feasting, whether as archaeologists, anthropologists, art historians, or historians, his work has been both a guide and an inspiration. In 2010, he published the seminal collective volume, Feasts, Archaeological and Ethnographic Perspectives on Food, Politics, and Power, which he edited with Brian Hayden. Professor Dietler's work draws on fieldwork conducted in both Africa and southern France. In the 1980s, he carried out ethnographic and ethnohistorical research among the Luo people of Kenya, together with his wife, Ingrid Herbig. And he has been excavating at the site of the Iron Age port settlement of Lat, ancient Latara, near Marseille, for over 20 years. Colonialism has been another main focus of his research. His 2010 book, Archaeologies of Colonialism, Consumption, Entanglement, and Violence in Ancient Mediterranean France, explores the encounters of indigenous Celtic populations with Etruscans, Greeks, and Romans, and has won the Archaeological Institute of America's James Wiseman Book Award. Professor Dietler is about to complete a project on the use of the past in the construction of Celtic identities, entitled Celts, Ancient, Modern, Postmodern. And it seems that Boston's Irish monuments will be featured in this publication. He also has an active interest in and teaches courses about a component of feasts that we are sadly neglecting tonight, namely music, and in particular Chicago blues. But that is the topic of another lecture. So please join me in welcoming Michael Dietler for his lecture on liquid material culture Anthropological Explorations of Alcohol and Drinking Vessels.
Thanks very much. Thank you. So let me first say thank you very much for that kind introduction, and also for the invitation to kick off this, I think, quite spectacular new exhibit on animal-shaped drinking vessels of the ancient world, organized by Susanna Ebbinghaus. And there is, as you saw from Susanna's slides here, there's quite a bit to see that will dazzle your eyes and I think also your imagination. And I don't want to stand in your way for too long in getting to the exhibit to look at this material in the flesh, as it were. My role here is simply to provide a bit of general context for the objects in the exhibit by offering a few brief comments on what anthropologists and archaeologists have to say about alcohol and feasting, as a way of showing why and how drinking vessels matter, of making them understandable as more than simply beautiful or exotic objects of art. Now, alcohol is a peculiar substance, to say the least. On the one hand, it is the most widely used psychoactive or consciousness-altering agent in the world. It is currently estimated that it's consumed by over 2.4 billion people. That is about a third of the global population. And with an average annual consumption of nearly 2 gallons of pure alcohol per person. Moreover, it has a very deep history, dating back at least 10,000 years and probably much longer. Yet, if you listen to many scholars in the American medical sciences or the public health field, the primary impression one gets of alcohol is as a social problem or an individual pathology. Problem drinking, or alcoholism, has long been the overwhelmingly dominant theme of research, despite the fact that about 95% of American adult drinkers manage to do so without developing what researchers call alcohol use disorder, or alcoholism. Now, anthropologists, on the other hand, approach the study of alcohol from a very different perspective, starting from the observation that alcohol has been a highly valued and centrally important feature of social life around the world for many millennia. We view drinking not as an aberrant behavior, but as a mainstream traditional cultural practice. And we focus on what is called normal drinking, what most people do most of the time. We ask why drinking alcohol has been so ubiquitous for so long, and try to understand the functions it commonly serves in society, how it is used, and the cultural beliefs and values that surround it. Now, that includes, of course, the quite different definitions each culture has about what constitutes abnormal drinking and the ways problems are handled. And to be fair, I should also mention that a number of medical researchers over the past couple of decades have also begun to reveal the multiple potential health benefits of moderate drinking as well. Others, however, continue to carry on the what I would see as kind of legacy of the prohibitionist perspective of seeing alcohol only as a dangerous substance. A prime example being an article in The Lancet that was published last week, and which you may have seen. It attracted quite a bit of attention in the popular press. From an anthropological point of view, I think this is a highly flawed document, study, but anyway. And as someone who likes a dram from time to time as well, I prefer to believe in the health benefits of alcohol rather than problems. In any case, the long-term ubiquity of alcohol is a well-documented fact. At the time of European colonial expansion over the globe, beginning in the late 15th century, nearly every region of the world already had its own indigenous forms of alcohol. Now, the only exceptions were Oceania and parts of North America, which quickly adapted the use of alcohol to their local social practices. And as I noted earlier, archaeologists have traced drinking back into deep antiquity on multiple continents. The earliest physical traces of alcohol so far detected are the remains of a drink made from rice, honey, and fruit from China in the 7th millennium BC. But other kinds of archaeological evidence from Turkey suggest that it may have been used in feasting there as early as the 10th millennium BC. And it is undoubtedly much older still. This is just the problem of evidence. And biological studies have suggested that the evolutionary adaptation that enabled human ancestors to consume alcohol may date back as much as 10 to 12 million years. It's something we share with gorillas and chimpanzees, but not with, say, orangutans or other apes. One of the distinctive properties of alcohol is that it is a liquid form of material culture that is designed to be quickly destroyed through ingestion into the human body. Hence, it is an ephemeral object, and it's something that actually becomes part of us, like food. But fortunately for archaeologists, its production and consumption have always required containers, which are usually far more durable. As we shall see, these objects do not serve merely the utilitarian function of containing liquid, but they actually frame its social use and meaning, and they have a lot to tell us about the nature of drinking. But in order to hear what they are saying, I think we need to have a better understanding of the range of social functions that alcohol plays. And in the interest of brevity, I will streamline tonight's discussion of approaches to alcohol and feasting by focusing on 5 general propositions that are based upon comparative anthropological analysis. Now, the first proposition is that alcohol is not, in fact, a single object. Rather, it is a collective label that lumps together an extremely diverse range of substances on the basis that they all contain ethanol, which is a psychoactive agent produced by the fermentation of sugars. However, the chemical composition and properties of ethanol were identified only in the 20th century, and the concept of alcohol, which is an Arabic word, as a collective term linking such things as beer, wine, and whiskey, is a product of the 19th century temperance movement. Now, this is not a universally shared folk category, especially among peoples who had not or have not been exposed to the historically recent Euro-American medicalization of drinking that arose in the context of an emerging urban industrial social order and the demands of factory work discipline. In fact, alcohol can be made from an astonishing variety of natural substances. Basically, anything that has sugar or starch can be converted into alcohol through fermentation. And human beings have been amazingly creative in realizing this fact. Examples of raw materials range from honey and cane sugar to grains such as barley, wheat, maize, rice, millet, sorghum, rye, oats, and a whole bunch of others. Sap from palm trees and cacti, fruit such as grapes, bananas, plums, apples, oranges, dates, and so forth, potatoes, beets, cassava, and other tubers, milk, and a variety of other substances. Now, around the world, different cultures have developed their own distinctive techniques and tastes. Moreover, these things were often mixed together, along with other ingredients in ways that would surprise our current tastes. Homer, for example, described a drink made of wine, barley meal, and grated goat cheese that was eaten with drunk with onions. Now, what is more, many varieties of alcoholic drinks have substantial nutritional value, and they often form a significant component of the diet of many peoples. In many small-scale agricultural societies, alcoholic beverages can comprise as much as a third or more of the total caloric intake. And it is common that a large portion of the household grain supply is devoted to the production of beer. Hence, it is perhaps more appropriate to think of alcohol, as many people do, as a special class of food with psychoactive properties that result from the application of alternative culinary techniques. After all, the same grain can become porridge, bread, beer, or whiskey, depending simply upon how it is treated. Now, a second proposition is that people universally use alcohol to create and maintain social relationships. And they use the enormous variability in drinking materials and practices that I just talked about to mark social identities and social groups. That is, they use alcohol as a social tool to create bonds of friendship and community with other people by sharing drink together, while at the same time marking the boundaries of those communities and a variety of status and category distinctions. Now, these distinctions include especially such things as gender, age, class, family or lineage, ethnicity, and religion, several other things as well. For example, in the American context, one can point to the common perception of what constitutes manly versus girly drinks in a widely understood marker of gender, or of the class distinctions between wine and beer drinkers. And I would add that ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia had similar wine versus beer class distinctions, while for the Greeks, on the other hand, it marked an ethnic distinction between Greeks and barbarians. Now, people also mark the status of events with alcohol. For example, the distinction between daily meals and feasts, or special rituals such as weddings, funerals, initiations, birthdays, and so forth. Now, again, in the American context, champagne is usually a marker of special kinds of celebrations, and it is more or less mandatory for weddings. But it is not only the type of alcohol that serves this kind of symbolic function. Drinking is a learned cultural practice, and all aspects of the activity are relevant. Now, most obvious are qualitative distinctions, such as aesthetic dispositions people learn about kinds of alcohol they prefer, appropriate drinking implements and their use, and expected drinking customs and manners. But complex permutations of other symbolic distinctions are also very important. And these include spatial distinctions, such as segregation into separate drinking spaces or other structured positioning of groups or individuals while drinking. It also includes temporal distinctions, such as the order of serving or consumption, or the timing of drinking events. And I might add here that in modern industrial societies, drinking often marks a clear symbolic boundary between work and leisure time, something that I would emphasize is not true of many other societies where drinking accompanies or even motivates work. And quantitative distinctions are also important. That is, the relative amounts of drink consumed or served to different people or for different kinds of events. These are clear symbolic markers of the status of events. Now, finally, behavioral distinctions are also highly significant. That is, differences in expected comportment during and after drinking, including such things as permissible signs of intoxication or expected modes of drunken comportment, serving or being served, and a host of other kinds of behavioral paths. It is very common, for example, that men and women, or different social classes, consume different kinds of drinks, often in separate spaces, and are expected to drink different quantities and to behave differently when drinking or when drunk. And I would add here that drunkenness is often not considered a sign of abnormal or problem drinking. It is frequently an expected part of sociality or rituals. In fact, not getting drunk would be the problem, not getting drunk. But people are expected to behave in culturally accepted ways when intoxicated. Now, I'll return to these features later with specific reference to drinking vessels. But let me now move on to a few more general observations about alcohol. Now, a third proposition is that because of its ability to transform human consciousness, alcohol has had a very important role in rituals of various kinds, as exemplified by these scenes from a Vatican Mass and from the Luo people of Kenya, among whom I lived for several years. Now, rite of passage ceremonies such as births, initiations, weddings, and funerals are very frequently marked by drinking, as are many other kinds of rituals. Indeed, as one participant summed up the case for Africa in general, if there's no beer, it's not a ritual. Now, the major modern world religions have also frequently incorporated alcohol into the core of their ceremonies, as with the Catholic Mass or the Jewish Shabbat. Indeed, Catholic monks were for centuries among the leading brewers and vintners, and they were largely responsible for keeping wine production alive after the collapse of the Roman Empire. Now, on the other hand, some religions have reacted strongly against alcohol, with prohibitions that constitute crucial symbolic boundaries of membership, as with Islam and several of the American evangelical Christian religions. Now, the important point is that religions may either embrace or ban alcohol, but it is never ignored. It's always a very powerful substance that they have to deal with. Another proposition is that alcohol has long been a prime political tool, by which I mean that it is used in the manipulation of power and the construction of authority. Because alcohol is so important in the context of rituals of public consumption, or what we call feasts, it has been crucial at multiple political scales in three distinctive patterns. In small-scale egalitarian societies without formal political roles or institutions, the manipulation of drinking in a competitive way frequently serves as a significant avenue to the creation of prestige and social status that are fundamental for leadership in influencing group decisions and actions. Now, this occurs through the operation of what I have called empowering feasts, meaning consumption events that enable the generation and maintenance of various forms of informal authority and power, such as the respect, deference, or sense of social debt that come from a reputation as a generous host. Now, in societies that have formal centralized leadership roles, such as kings or chiefs, the generous public provision of alcohol on a regular basis frequently comes to be seen as a duty of the person who performs that role, as it symbolically institutionalizes a kind of patron-client relationship. Now, this kind of political role for alcohol, in what I've called the patron role feast, has been observed in cases ranging from petty chiefs and royalty in Africa, to European Iron Age chieftains, to the Inca imperial state, where alcohol was so important to the operation of the government that it maintained vast storehouses and compounds of female brewers, specifically to produce chicha, that is maize beer, for large consumption events. Finally, in societies with hierarchies of social classes, feasting may also be used to symbolically mark class boundaries by using very expensive or exotic forms of alcohol or drinking vessels to create exclusive consumption communities. This is a practice that I have called diacritical feasts. A final proposition is that the enormous demand for alcohol, stemming from its social and political importance, has ensured that it has frequently had a major role in the operation of the economy and in various colonial encounters. Now, today, the world market for alcohol is estimated to be in excess of $170 billion per year, and that is only for commercial production, which does not account for most of the alcohol consumed in rural Africa, Latin America, or Asia. But this is not simply a modern phenomenon. Alcohol has long been a major factor in the economy, and colonial encounters in various parts of the ancient and modern worlds as well. Now, in order to understand this feature, it is, I think, first necessary to very briefly consider the properties of alcohol as an economic good. Now, most traditional forms of alcohol are made for immediate consumption. They will spoil within a few days of fermentation. And this is true for most types of grain beer before hops were added as a preservative, which was an invention of European monks during the 9th to 12th centuries AD. And it's true for most other fruit, sap, or starch-based alcohols before the even later invention of distillation. Now, the major ancient exception is wine, which could be preserved in amphorae for years. This means that most traditional indigenous forms of alcohol could not be traded over great distances or stockpiled. Production and consumption were usually close in both time and space. Moreover, they were usually made from products that are a common part of the household agrarian base, and production was often a domestic activity. Now, wine, on the other hand, could be accumulated for years and traded over vast distances. It had a much stronger potential to become a circulating commodity, that is, a good produced for exchange rather than immediate consumption at a social event. Now, historically, the roles of alcohol in colonial situations have been extremely complex, ranging from an intended implement of seduction and control to an imagined stimulus of disorder, to a source of colonial and post-colonial state revenue, to a major component of a subversive alternative economy, that is, things like bootleg production and smuggling. Now, in the ancient world, wine was a form of alcohol implicated in various colonial encounters around the Mediterranean. For example, it was a trade commodity that served as the primary element linking relations between the indigenous peoples of southern France and alien Etruscans, Greeks, and Romans over a period of 5 centuries, from the late 7th century BC on. Now, as the trade expanded to non-Mediterranean France in the 2nd century BC, it reached such proportions that ships carrying up to 10,000 amphorae of wine as a single cargo transported over 4 million gallons of Roman wine per year to France for nearly a century. Now, alcohol has also been an equally important element in the expansion of modern European colonialism in both the Old and New worlds, and in the operation of post-colonial states in the age of globalization. In West Africa, for example, distilled spirits, brandy, rum, and gin, played a major role in the Atlantic slave trade from its beginning, serving as a commodity, a currency, and a lubricant for establishing exchange relationships. Liquor became a key trade item in the triangle that linked Europe, Africa, and the Americas. It was traded for African slaves who worked the American sugar plantations that provided the raw material for rum that was used to obtain more slaves. And by the 1770s, North American rum exports to Africa alone are estimated to have averaged more than 300,000 gallons annually. Now, the growing slave sugar economy of the 17th century also made cheap rum readily available to the working classes of England and Holland for the first time. Moreover, with the imposition of European colonial control over Africa in the 19th century, colonial states in most regions began to rely on taxes upon alcohol, both for a substantial part of their operating revenues and for the mobilization and pacification of a native labor force. Now, having very quickly outlined some general propositions about the social, political, and economic significance of alcohol through the ages, let me now turn back to briefly to a consideration of how this may help us to think about drinking vessels, such as those in the exhibit. And let me first emphasize again that drinking vessels serve not only the utilitarian function of containing alcoholic liquids and enabling their consumption, but also the crucial symbolic function of framing drinking acts and events. They can, for example, transform drinking into a status-marking practice between groups of people, even when the alcohol consumed by each group is identical. Now, as this slide suggests, containers serving the same utilitarian function can speak eloquently about the status of the drinkers and the nature of the event by virtue of their singularity or repetitive banality, the nature of their basic materials, the degree of artistic elaboration, and so forth. Now, drinking vessels can also emphasize communal sharing versus individual consumption, for example, with large communal pots versus small cups or glasses, or define contrasting kinds of sharing that are appropriate among different categories of people. In the case of the Luo in Kenya, for example, only senior men could drink from a communal pot with straws. Young men and women had to use cups and drink from a different pot and a different kind of beer. Drinking vessels can also mark the status of distinct kinds of drinking events, such as daily meals versus ceremonial feasts, where specific types and quantities of drinking vessels would be used solely at feast. They can also be used to remind drinkers and provoke conversations about connections to historical events, mythical narratives, gods, ancestors, or past or present rulers that may be invoked through imagery on the vessels themselves and be important for experiencing rituals of different kinds. Or they may invoke sentiments of communal identity of a local, nationalist, family, or clan variety. And you see a number of different types here. Now, drinking vessels can also serve a prophylactic function to protect against poison, magic, or the evil eye. Or, more comically, they can make the drinker appear to be wearing a mask as he or she raises the glass. And you can imagine what these would look like with somebody drinking out of them. They can also comment sardonically on the very rituals in which they're being used, or on the power of alcohol, as many addict drinking cups from ancient Greece do. Now, this is actually very useful for archaeologists, as it shows us how the vessels were used at feasts. And finally, drinking vessels may even be used to directly control people's behavior, as with the many examples that cannot be set down until empty, thus forcing drinkers to consume an entire serving without resting, or to pass the cup around in a continuous cycle. Now, in brief, drinking vessels constitute a multifaceted symbolic medium that plays a number of vital roles in defining the consumption of an especially powerful form of liquid material culture with a very long history. Moreover, in contrast to the alcohol itself, drinking vessels are a durable form of material culture that can speak eloquently to archaeologists and historians about past drinking customs, long after the alcohol they contained has fulfilled its function of being consumed. An anthropological perspective, I think, on drinking, I think, can help us to better hear what the vessels are saying to us. Now, in conclusion, I hope that this very rapid journey through an extremely complex topic has at least fired your imaginations to think about the drinking vessels on display in the exhibit as more than just impressive works of art displayed in glass cases. Now, armed with a bit of anthropological context, I invite you all to reflect on what these objects mean or meant to the people who drank from them, to imagine how they were used in feasting rituals of various kinds, and to think about what symbolic functions and the animal imagery may have served in different contexts. And I hope that the experience of viewing the exhibit may, in this way, also stimulate you to think comparatively about your own drinking practices, customs, and tastes. In effect, to become an anthropologist of your own drinking culture. And one of the great benefits of anthropology, I would claim, is that it forces us to see the peculiarity of the things we normally take for granted. And drinking is certainly a prime example of that, I think. So thank you very much and enjoy the exhibit.
Well, thank you very much, Michael, for this rich overview of the social roles and function of alcohol. And as you say, I think you have made us all very self-conscious drinkers. And in some ways, you have also put the liquid back into the vessels that are on view upstairs. And before we go and look at them, I wanted to ask you, as we walk through the exhibition today, were there some vessels that struck you and you thought, oh yeah, this really speaks to one of my main propositions?
Well, that's a very good question. Actually, I think they all do, because the vessels that you selected for the exhibition really illustrate the whole range of different forces that are in play in terms of defining the social roles of drinking. And I think one of the interesting things about focusing on the animal imagery, since drinking vessels are made in a wide variety of different forms, but by focusing on the animal imagery, it forces us to think about what the symbolism of those animals actually is. And you pointed out in your introductory lecture that some of them are animals that are symbols of real force and strength, things like bulls and lions and so forth. That might be associated with power and royalty and various kinds of superior status. Other ones are quite comical. So things like drinking out of an ass's rhyton and with the liquid streaming into your mouth is a very comical act. It's not designed to sort of highlight the dignity of the person doing the drinking. And so there are a variety of different things that are in play here. Not all of these vessels are doing the same thing. They're doing quite different things. And so I think it's the exhibit itself is really a kind of open invitation for people to kind of grapple with these differences and think very carefully, reflect about how these images might have been taken in the societies in which they existed. So I think I would just like to compliment you on a really outstanding exhibit. It's a fascinating thing.
Thank you very much. At this point, I think I would like to invite you to explore the galleries and also to join the celebration with a reception in the courtyard upstairs. Thank you for coming.